All right.
So recording now?
Now we're recording.
Okay. So quick, if I may quickly summarize.
Please.
So I talked about the CI best practices program. It's not clear whether to put it in this or the best practices working group. I got the impression from well, actually, want people quickly state their positions.
Jennifer?
I would love for it to be here, and I'm strongly in support of the best practices badge program being in this group.
Okay.
I'm in support of it being in this group and having any other group provide their opinions or thoughts on the criteria. I just would like a single point of change for criteria.
+1 on that, yeah.
This is Kay, and my feeling is that we want to keep the security metrics project and the security best practices together. And since security metrics is in this group, it makes sense that the other would be here as well.
Okay, so here's what I would propose as next steps. And this is, of course, consistent with my own perplexity about trying to put, I think everyone agrees it should have only one home and not try to be multi-homed. I think coordination between working groups is always a good thing. So what I would propose next is, since we have two different working groups, each of whom thinks it should be in their working group, I'm going to propose that this go back up to the TAC for resolution, and wherever it ends up, it ends up. I'm, by the way, happy to work with anybody. I don't care which working group. So, you know, and we'll. And then we can go from there. That just seems like process-wise the right thing to do. Does anyone have any objections to that as kind of a next step?
I like it. Maybe could we have each group submit a really short statement that just summarizes their position? Why?
Sure.
Do the TAC?
Yep.
I can't tell the groups what to do, but we can at least ask. I can certainly ask.
We will do that for us.
I'm sorry? Oh,
we,
good.
We will do that for this working group.
You know, I don't think I have Xavier's contact info. Maybe somebody can help me out.
I'll send it to you, David.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Okay. All right. So I will propose that up to the TAC, and we'll have each working group, and that just seems like the, you know, we'll at least finally exercise the what's the TAC supposed to do. And one of the things I'm sure is adjudicate between working groups. So we ought to cross that off the list of things being done. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, just want to let everybody know, Luigi offered to take a lead on converting the threat paper that we wrote over to Markdown, which means it'll be a lot easier for folks to contribute in the future. Luigi, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that at this point.
No, it's okay.
Okay, cool, perfect. Okay, so metrics update and discussion. So Ryan, I don't know if I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to give an update on where we are with the UX stuff?
Yeah, no worries. Let's see if I can share this really quick. Oh, man, I have this problem every time I go to share something in Teams. I have to re-permission things. So give me one sec.
It is showing.
You can share it, Mike.
It looks like it's working for. At least I can see.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you see the UX right now?
Yep.
All right. Okay, I guess I'll have to change anything. All right, so I think some of you have seen this before, back when we were doing OSSC things, but this is a very rough mock-up around this idea of gathering these metrics for a number of different projects and then being able to collect them and visualize them in some sort of dashboard UX. So this very first home screen, the idea here is that, you know, there'd be like a quick jump in popular components of, here are the things that people are looking at, and you could search for these, you could filter and kind of look at what you're wanting to find. If you're looking for a encryption library, you could search via that. Excuse me. And then from here, you could drill down. It gives you kind of a high level of where things are at, but then you could drill down into an individual component. And basically what we did was we broke this down into different categories. So we have a huge spreadsheet of all these different metrics that we've talked about collecting. And obviously just spitting all those onto the screen is not super helpful. So we broke them into these 5 categories around like policy, assurance, risk, activity, provenance, naming TBD. But you click on each one of these, we get a metric score, a summary of all these things together. So you kind of have this nice little dash that shows policy related are code reviews required? Do you have 1 or 2 people? Is there an automated test suite, right? So we go through and we rank all these things and show what is available and what that project has and doesn't have. And then that's what contributes to the score. So each of these screens really just kind of show a couple of different views of these things where you can find out more information. So if it's your project, you can actually get tips about what you should do to improve your score. And if you're looking for a project to use, you can see what is good and what isn't about it. So so at a very high level, very rough, that's kind of where we're at. So happy to take questions and feedback and all that.
So Ryan, do you see a one of the ideas that I know we were talking about was like, collecting raw data versus processing it versus having an expert come in and say, the historical CVE count actually is 0 because we changed project names, or something that like you can't derive automatically. So having like an overlay, does that still kind of jive with this?
Yeah, so I think there's metrics that we have that are very explicit, right? They're calculated, they're queried, right? Or however we get those. And then there's definitely, I think, like you just said, there's some examples of some items that are a little bit more squishy, right? Where and we need to have some sort of standardized method. And I'm sure David's dealt with this in the batching program where somebody goes, well, yeah, but no, it's actually like this, and then somebody's got to go identify that and verify it, and then have that support. So I think it's something that we want to do, but I think initially we should just focus on the very tangible things that we can actually quantify, show those things, and then because that's really what you want to like. It's less arguable, right? Mm-hmm. But then the other things are definitely relevant in some cases where people are looking for something that matters to them. Those things that are a little soft, we still want to display it somehow. So, but I think that's sort of a stretch goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will add that just the naming and identifying of projects is a well-known problem area. The CI most recent census actually specifically noted that as a problem, where just because you have something with this name, that doesn't mean that it's the same thing with this other name. The same thing can have multiple names. Multiple things can have the same name. It can get complicated in a hurry.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the past. There's versioning becomes a problem as well, and
right.
and name changes, right? Yeah, so we definitely have to do some work there.
So
have we looked at using Perl as our way for identifying projects? So Perl in this case is
right. PURL, yes.
Right, package URL.
We could use Perl too.
Yeah. The problem is that a vast number of software cannot be identified using Perl today. So I've actually already submitted several proposals to extend Perl because, for example, if you're in Maven, no problem. If you're in Ruby Gems, no problem. If you're zlib, problem. So there's a vast, I think Perl could be in the long term a very useful answer, but it's going to need some enhancement to reach that level. And of course, you got the other problem that just because you have the same name, different names, they may refer to the different Perls can refer to the same projects.
Right.
Yeah, the CVE working group is talking about a lot of these problems too, and I think they've also discussed some of those changes with the Perl team.
Yeah.
And there's another group that I'm involved in, which is the Software Bill of Materials standardization group. And we're also looking at Perl as the long-term answer to that. And also we've recognized that there need to be extensions to Perl, but if we get everybody focusing on Perl's the solution, and let's extend that where we need to, I think that will help a number of efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the core of it, at least in my mind, is the concept of zlib, or the project sans implementation of zlib is one thing, and then are the implementations and the binaries and the distribution points and the package, and all these things are kind of related to the concept of zlib, but not themselves all the same as each other. So
Right.
So yeah, it's a mess. For this UX, Ryan, or everybody really, is this about so language analyzability? Just take one, which is I don't want to make it about the metric itself, but language analyzability. If Dojo version 1 was written exclusively in assembler, and then Dojo version 2 was written purely in, I don't know, the most analyzable language there is, what should that say? Are we looking at Dojo the concept, the abstract project? Are we looking at Dojo version 1.2.3? What is the target here?
Yeah, I sort of view this as, because it's definitely a problem, right? This goes to the version history, right?
Yeah.
And that there can be dramatic changes, even for web frameworks that go from 2.8 to 3.0, all of a sudden there's a whole new API and it's been rewritten, right? And there's new issues. So I think we probably, as much as possible, would want to lean towards the most recent, quote, stable release as what we show, but then there's got to be some sort of historical breakdown that says, okay, this is 2.0, but here's 1.8, and it was that, because people are still going to be using old versions of things and they want to see what that analysis is.
Okay, so the target of analysis really is, aside from maybe roll up, it's always a particular version. So we're only looking at concrete things. Which is interesting because the badge program is very much about the project without any version. So you could have, just to make it concrete, Dojo. Let's say Dojo has the gold, the gold badge, top everything, but then they decide tomorrow to add a whole bunch of, I don't know, Perl. Or something that's not analyzable very well to their code base. The badge program will still continue to show gold because it's against, well, maybe it's the other way. Something historical is terrible, so it would show up here as terrible, but the badge program reflects current, and that would show up gold. So I think we just need to think about how we show things, even the active CVE count. That would be against the version that you're viewing right now.
Probably not, actually.
Yeah,
the CVEs will be over a period of time.
Be historical.
Well,
yeah,
you're right. I guess active would be.
I think we actually have a bit of fragmentation there, right? So think about this a little bit more. There is definitely historical version related things, and there are also these sort of generalized groupings of the process side of things and policies. Do you have code reviews required, and are you running static analysis, right? That's kind of irrelevant to version. That's just, what is it today? What are your, quote, best practices that you're doing? Then there's version 1.8 has been analyzed by this thing, and there's 2 CVEs in it and that type of thing. So we may need to tweak the UX to have more of a showcase of hey, this is how this project is being run, the overall health of it, and then there's the very, very specific, this version has these things type of view.
Yeah.
So I feel like we do need both, and I think of them as one way to think of it is you search for Dojo, and what you see is Dojo project. I think I'm repeating what you were saying, Mike. So you see Dojo project, and then you see Dojo version X, and then you see Dojo RPM, and you see Dojo. Anyway, so it shows up. Dojo is a lot of different things, but I think that we would want this UX to be able to allow people to find it in any of its instantiations and get information about each of those.
Yeah.
I think we also want to be really clear here, and I think we're aligned. I just want to verify that this is about people who already know they want to use Dojo and are looking for evaluations versus people who are looking for a tool that does X. But maybe is that a correct assumption?
It's both, actually. So one thing that we talked about was, hey, I want to go see the thing that I have and see what it's rated as, but then also having everything kind of grouped by category. So you could say, I'm looking for a at-rest encryption library, right? So you could browse through encryption libraries and see descriptions of projects and find one that has a good rating on it to choose from. So it's kind of both use cases.
I hear you on the second part. It's just, I think that's a lot harder to get right in the sense that there's a lot of information that goes into that choice. It's not security related, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree.
So
this is just one slice of it, I think, to help someone make that decision. Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying, I would prefer that we prioritize the first use case.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say I agree with that as well.
Yeah, and if I could add something real quick, I mean, as soon as you say, "Hey, I'm going to look at it historically over time," boy, that gets difficult and hard. And I think there's at least possibly it's a self-justification, but justifying looking at the current, because of course, when you pick something or when you're using something, it's not just this point in time. You're probably not going to want to move off that for quite some time in the future. And so even if they didn't apply certain good practices in the past, knowing that they're now employing some good practices will hopefully improve that in the longer term as you use it, and you'll get advantage of those practices, even if they just started today. You have the advantage of, well, at least they started today.
Is there any need to have any feedback mechanism for users directly on this platform?
Yes.
So do you mean if they disagree with something that's being reported here, or are you talking about?
They have their own evaluation information to report. I don't know.
Right.
Is this? I guess I'm asking: is this purely information dissemination, or do we expect to also receive information?
I think so for the MVP next 60 days, it's definitely a one-way thing. Beyond that, I think this needs to be a crowdsourced thing, particularly when we're talking about expert overlays or whatever we want to call them. We need to be able to gather information from human beings, and now whether the this looks wrong is just to a GitHub issues thing to report, that's that would be fine for initially, but
may I recommend that at least to start GitHub issues or something, because I will say for the badging, we have had some very strange things where people, the marketers show up and say all sorts of lies, and so the problem is, if you are serious about crowdsourcing, crowdsourcing can be awesome, but it could also be terrifying. There are some people out there who do not have your best intentions at heart.
I'm shocked.
Shocked, I'm sure, in a security group to make this claim.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Just a meta point. Is there somewhere that we're tracking the waves of releases? Because in the last couple minutes, we've come across are we going to take user input and integrate it into the platform? We've come across is this release going to be for people that want to look at, for example, Dojo, or people who are looking for a list of tools that are evaluating whether Dojo is the #1 fit for them? Have we, I know we had talked about this really early on, but do we have somewhere that we're actively tracking which features are part of which version of what we're making? Because I think there's a bunch of things that we could talk about in terms of future versions, and I feel it would be great to lay out kind of which ones we're aiming to do in the short term and which ones are for not the October release.
So I had signed up as someone to help with project management. And as I was thinking about this last week, I started to create a document. I just dropped it in the chat window. And first thing I should say is I'm still relatively new to this group, so there was a lot of discussion beforehand that I missed, so I'm catching up. But in the document that I created, my intent, so what I dropped is a link to an issue that I created, and then from the issue, there's a link to the document. And what I thought we might do is, again, because it feels to me like there's some similarity between best practices badge and the security metrics project. I thought it might be interesting to go through the goals, scenarios, and requirements for each of those. And then I know also that from Google, Dan and Kim have been thinking about the concept of security scorecards. And so I thought it might make sense to capture those goals, scenarios, and requirements, and then kind of come back to, what are the overall goals, what's the platform we need to build, and then how do we, what's the design for the overall platform, and then how do we space out, or I don't mean space out really, but how do we create the milestones and then start saying, okay, this happens in this milestone, and this is in a future milestone, et cetera. So that's a bit more comprehensive of view than what you were asking, Jennifer, but that's how I had started to go about thinking about it. Open to suggestions. Maybe this is not the right way. Maybe there's a better way.
That sounds awesome to me.
Yeah, gathering the requirements, step one, right? So I think that's great. And as far as what specifically to Jennifer's question, tracking when we do releases, could we just use GitHub projects to start laying out, create issues for everything that's got to be developed, and then you just move it from one, timeline to another type thing, just for simplicity and keeping things in public? Or
yeah, it would be nice to be able to get more granular. I think this comparative analysis that you've presented, Kay, is great. But I think to Ryan's point, having something that's very granular where we can talk about individual features and stuff that we're including or not including in a given release would be helpful. Just because I feel like sometimes we're discussing them and they may not be something we're going to develop for several weeks or a few months. And also, for example, Luigi's bringing up in the chat a question around historical versus current CVEs, which is maybe an important conversation to have if we're releasing those metrics in this first wave. But I'm never quite sure when to bring them up.
Yeah, projects and issues make a lot of sense to me also.
Okay, great.
Just as a specific way to go about tracking.
That sounds really good.
And then I think discussion on those can be via the issue. It can be at these meetings, obviously, wherever it makes sense.
A slight deviation from the project management side of things. In that UX screenshot which you shared earlier, there were multiple categories, and I was asking about assurance. So what would classify as assurance? Would CII badge be one of the assurances that you are giving to the consumer, saying that yes, this package or this project is a reliable project? So would the badge program be contributing to the assurance side of things?
So assurance, I'm trying to remember what we had in there. There's a document somewhere where we kind of grouped these things, but it was kind of early thinking. But assurance work was have we run tooling and analysis on it, which ones, that sort of thing. Has an actual security review been performed on this project? It was, and then I think separately, best practices were a different category, which I think are starting to fall under what we're calling policy, or what I called policy, in the UX mockups. And so I think best practices sort of fall under that thing, but which is definitely different than assurance. But again, category is totally up for grabs. Like, we can split these up and redefine them. It was just a useful thing at the time to try to help wrap our heads around these like 50 some odd metrics that we had come up with a few months ago.
I was asking very specifically because I think I'm probably the only guy who said the badge probably does not belong in this group. So my point of view was that, because when you are saying that, when you're assuring that this project is of high quality, high reliability, etc., you might be sourcing that kind of info from multiple sources. Example would be, let's say you're getting the static code analysis from Code Climate. And let's say GitHub Actions is giving you one side of things, the security scanning. And similarly, there might be multiple parameters which you are sourcing from different sources, in which case just owning the CII badge might not make sense. This is obviously my opinion, because you might have to provide badges from multiple sources to finally say, yes, this has gone through a very thorough scanning and check. So I just wanted to understand what was that category assurance and what comes under that.
I can't speak for the group, but I can say for myself, working at least within the within the U.S. government, the term assurance is quite broad. It's basically, give me some assurance that the software will do what it's supposed to do, and not something malicious. And given that, tools are one way to give some assurance. Best practices and processes are another way to give me some assurance. Assuming that any one of those things is going to be enough is probably, some information is better than none. Lots more information tends to be better than just a little bit. But for example, if you're using a highly dynamic language and you use a static analyzer, that's great. Should I trust it? Not very much. The odds are excellent that the analysis tool might manage to catch a very tiny percentage of any vulnerabilities. So even a good tool used against certain situations, well, I'm glad to see it, and I would be glad to see the results, but I would want to see other things as well. And so really that's where I think for assurance in a broad, if you accept the definition broadly, you want many different, coming back to your point, you want many different views that together provide confidence that it has reached some level of adequacy for your purpose.
Exactly, yes. So precisely that. So in which case, owning the CII best practices badge alone in this group might not make sense.
I don't think that owning the badge program means that we are bound to exclusively use the badge program. We could decide the badge program is one of 100 inputs and carries this particular weight based off of whatever. Right. Yeah, I definitely, if the decision were we get the badge program, but we can't consider any other metrics, I would say then that would be a crazy decision.
Right. In fact, I would agree with you. The badge focuses more on process and that you're using tools. It doesn't include the results of tools. You want the results of tools, but you don't want just results of tools, because things like having version control and having people review makes a difference. And so this comes back to it. And again, I don't know if this is true across the world. Probably not. Nothing seems to be true across the world. But having multiple points of view and not multiple ways of looking at the problem to get better insight into, yes, it's got good practices. Yes, the results are good. Frankly, I would measure the people. Do the people seem to know anything? I would want to, if all the developers just learned how to program, I would have a whole lot less confidence than, the lead of this has been doing this for 10 years, expert in the field, knows how to write secure software. I would have a lot of confidence in that, even without the other measures. And I would want all of those measures.
Yeah, I think the plan has always been that the best practices is just a metric that pipes into, it's one of many. And then as far as the assurance thing goes, yeah, I think the view with naming it that was really kind of a more narrow slice of it, like the thought that, oh, if I'm doing security assurance work, that means I'm running tools and doing analysis, and that was really the only view of it. It's not the broadly like give me assurance that this project is good. It was just that narrow slice. So given the confusion, that we probably want to rename it, but I think that's the idea behind it. But and then as far as like moving the where that group sits as far as the badging, I think it depends on how we define ownership, right? So like if the tooling of how some of that analysis happens and goes and gets collected to determine how you get a badge and what level you have, if that's one thing, and then the definition of those things is another thing, like you could argue that we could split that up between the two groups. Because I think the collection, the technical analysis clearly sits in what this group is doing. The other group, despite the naming match, isn't actually doing that work. They're doing something else entirely.
Yeah, I also think that if you drill into any one of the badge criteria, use version control. We're not going to talk about how one would set up version control or the relative benefits and pros and cons of distributed versus centralized version. Like, that's not our game, but that probably would be the best practice at working group that would kind of give the developers the way to achieve these and the understanding of why and how to choose one versus another, and convince me that I should do X as opposed to Y. So, and there are lots of best practices that have nothing to do with
education.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like their best practices education were like best practices quantification.
Cool. Okay, we have 15 minutes left for this meeting. I would like to make sure that we have clear next steps for next time. So, Kay, would it be helpful for everyone to party on the doc that you've linked from the chat or from the issue? Kay, you're on mute. I'm going to assume the answer is going to be yes. So
the answer is yes. Sorry about that. I was talking away to myself. Yeah. No, that would be super helpful. And I guess that there are some documents. I know Kim, pasted in some information about the security scorecard, and I could take a shot at trying to coalesce that information in. But if people who are familiar with those projects are willing to do that, then that helps. So maybe Kim can work on security scorecards and David on security best practices, and maybe Ryan or someone else on the security metrics project. Does that make sense? Sorry if I'm volunteering people and they don't. They can say they don't want to be volunteered.
I'll volunteer to do the CI best practices badge. I think that's a bullet I can't dodge.
Okay.
Yeah, I linked the doc that I put together. I need to probably move over to my personal account to make it easier to access, but happy to link that from your doc, Kay, if it's helpful here. It kind of goes through the requirements that we're looking for having a scorecard that's automatable and something that we can do, automatically without a whole bunch of user input. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and that document, Kim, was a lot of what drove that policies tab that I put in the UX.
I liked it.
Address some of those. Yeah, okay, I thought you might.
Cool. So I'm adding. I'm trying to add these. In fact, I'll get out of the box so other people can. I added a homework section at the bottom of the meeting notes. So I'll try to put all the action items down there. So we'll say for next meeting, can we agree that we'll get our content in there, or at least enough to review with the group? Cool. Okay, so in that case, I'm thinking it's probably not I would like to continue moving forward with development, at least as far as the UX and planning things, knowing that we might have to back out a little bit. One of the and this is super tactical, but like things like analyzability. This is something that's relatively easy to calculate, except that what is a more analyzable language? This is inherently an expert, kind of, we think that, I don't know, C# is more analyzable than assembly. Does it make sense to go with that approach for some metrics like this? And if so, we just kind of need experts to come forward and say that, this is the way it is. And that way we can have the metrics kind of reflect that. We don't need to do that here, but that's kind of just super tactical to light up one metric that was in the UX and ready to go.
I've actually participated in some similar things to that a long time ago, and I will say there's some actual additional complications you may not appreciate. One, well, you probably do.
I know what you're going to say, but
well, okay, all right. One is it may be hard, but there's economic incentive. C is hard to analyze. Guess what? There's billions of dollars being willing to invest in C. Well, not billions, but many millions. And there are certain languages that are Haskell's a whole lot easier to analyze. The number of dollars available for analyzing Haskell is much smaller. Okay. Once you admit certain specializations, things that are hard become easier. I'll point out a trivial example. Ruby, like Python, is actually rather challenging to analyze unless you have a lot of type annotations. Oh, it's a Ruby on Rails application. Oh, I suddenly know a whole lot of things. Mm-hmm. And so a language by itself may not be enough because, if I know, for example, it's a Python Flask application as opposed to generic Python, you now know a whole lot more than you did before. So I just say, I think analyzability is a good idea and important criterion, but I think it's more complicated to answer that. It does become qualitative in some sense because you're influenced by economics, what's the incentive, and you're influenced by other factors like frameworks where if you add a lot of constraints, it suddenly is easier.
Does that explode the problem from, 10 rows to 100 rows or 10 rows to 1,000,000 rows?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay.
What I would say is just go for it and note some of those things as we go. I would say start qualitatively because that's what we have to do anyway, but add those nuances that there's economic incentive, that adding specific frameworks and other constraints can make the job easier.
Yep. Cool. Perfect. I see, Jennifer, do you want to talk about explainer of metrics?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. So one thing that we had talked about in the past that I'd like to refresh here, and I'm fine with leading this one, is on us publishing a bit of detail about how we came to these metrics and why they matter. So we're imagining that someone is interacting with Ryan's dashboard and they're making use of whatever the first release of this tool is, and they want to understand something like, for example, language analyzability and why things score a certain way and why it's relevant to security. It would be great if we can link out to either a blog post or something of that form that we have like just a longer discussion about each metric so that people understand kind of where we're coming from and how we made those decisions. So I'm happy to start drafting this. I guess as input, we would use the list of metrics that we are intending to move forward with and like how great the units are. And then for each one, I and anyone who wants to participate can draft basically an explainer for that from a security perspective. Obviously, these things will be contentious, so some of this is to mitigate the contention and make a clear statement. So it will probably make sense to have it well reviewed afterward, but before we publish. So in terms of moving forward, I guess I can open an issue and then folks can let me know if they want to be involved.
Yeah, I love this idea. I remember we talked about it many months ago. It makes a ton of sense. Yes, and I'm happy to be involved.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. So if we have anything else on the agenda that we really need to go through, is there anything else that anyone would like to talk about?
I just posted on the channel and I think you've already replied. I think that's the first thing we need before anyone can contribute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I hope end of this week, but this week is already crazy for me. So it might be till Monday. But yeah, it'll be some sort of a Docker build, simple. It just works.
Oh.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so our next meeting is October 14th. What I'd love everybody to do for the last 5 minutes is, let's see, so I just want to make sure that the homework is good. So everybody party on the requirements doc. Let's see, Jennifer to open an issue to start the metric explainer. Let's see. David, you and I will coordinate with the other working group on fighting over the badge program.
You know, I think it probably is easier to just say, I'll make sure that both work. You already know. So yeah. I'll make sure the other working group knows that, hey, it looks like there's a fight, rah. And that basically that each working group is supposed to present, I would imagine, just a couple sentences. We don't need to make this an essay. Just, you know, why should it be part of this working group? And then that'll give the TAC something to work off of. And I'm assuming that there's going to be at least one representative from each working group on the next TAC meeting.
Yep,
They've been invited, and hopefully they are going to show up.
Okay.
Well, if they don't show up, I don't get it. So it's like finding a traffic ticket.
I just want to make it very clear. I am not in control of other people.
Excellent. Is there anything that I've forgotten or that we need to talk about in the last few minutes? Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and have a lovely week. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, enjoy the sun.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks.